Hello, I'm Gwen Hill at Pine Ridge Baptist Church Sunday School Department, Ladies Class. And we are studying the book of Revelation. We're in chapter 11. Chapter 11 is going over the trumpets. The trumpets are announcing the wrath of God. We are believing that the moment that the seventh trumpet sounds, that is the time when the last 3.5 years of the age of the tribulation is going on. So let's go to chapter 11 and let's read about the two witnesses. John is writing this, so when it says I, it means the Apostle John. I was given a reed like a measuring rod, and I was told, go and measure the temple of God and the altar with its worshipers, but exclude the outer court. Do not measure it, because it has been given to the Gentiles, and they're going to trample the holy city for 42 months. And I will appoint my two witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. They are the two olive trees and the two lampstands, and they stand before the Lord of the earth. If anyone tries to harm them, fire will come from their mouths and devour their enemies. This is how anyone who wants to harm them must die. They have power to shut up the heavens so that it will not rain during the time they are prophesying, and they have power to turn the waters into blood and to strike the earth with every kind of plague as often as they want. Now, when they have finished their testimony, the beast that comes up from the abyss will attack them and overpower and kill them. Their bodies will lie in the public square in the great city, which is figuratively called Sodom and Gomorrah, where also their Lord was crucified. For 3.5 days, some of from every people, tribe, language, and nation will gaze on their bodies and refuse them burial. The inhabitants of the earth will gloat over them and will celebrate by sending each other gifts, because the two prophets had tormented them who live on the earth. But after the 3.5 days, the breath of life from God entered them, and they stood on their feet, and terror struck all of those who saw them. And when they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, come up here, and they went up to heaven in a cloud, while their enemies looked on. And at that very hour, there was a severe earthquake, and 1/10 of the city collapsed. 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake, and the survivors were terrified and giving glory to the Lord God of heaven. The second woe has passed. The third woe is coming soon. This is the time span between the second and the sixth and the seventh trumpet. So let's break it down a little bit. John says he was given a reed like a measuring rod. All right. When we've been studying the Old Testament, a palm was like 4.5 to 5 inches. A measurement from the elbow to the end of the index finger, approximately 18 inches, was a cubit, and a rod was, in some sources that I read, was like 3 yardsticks, so it would have been about 9 feet. I have heard some people say that it was as long as 20 feet, but what I personally have studied, it was 9 foot. So John was given a reed to measure with. Remember, we're talking about 100 BC. They didn't have Black & Decker tools. They didn't have Milwaukee measuring tapes. They didn't have 100-foot tapes that retracted. They had makeshift things that they had standardized, the rods. So John was given one, and he was told what? Go and measure the temple of God and the altar with its worshipers. Where was he going to measure this temple? Not in Jerusalem, because when John was alive, there was no temple in Jerusalem. It had been destroyed in 70 AD. Not one stone was left on the other. So what temple was he told to measure? And I was taxed with someone I greatly respect who said that they weren't so sure that the temple was a physical temple, but a spiritual temple. I'm not going to say that it's not, but this gives you some pretty concrete definitions of things that is a physical temple. And I'm of the belief that this is a physical temple. So I'm recording this in 2024. There is no great temple in Jerusalem, in Israel today, but I believe there will be. I believe there will be. And I believe for us today, looking at this, we know the Dome of the Rock, the Muslim Dome of the Rock, is on the Temple Mount. We don't believe that they would ever allow a temple to be built up there. But they would if they thought that it was doing them good. And if the Israelis didn't want to build on top of the temple of the Dome of the Rock. We have had archaeologists very convincingly since the mid-1960s trying to show us and teach us and how the temple, Solomon's temple, Herod's temple, was not built where the Dome of the Rock is. It's slightly over to the side. They have found a cistern that they think was right under the main temple floor, that to them proves that there, and that the Jews are very comfortable with saying, this is where the temple's going to be built. And he tells him, he said, I want you to go. Remember, this is a vision John is having, and the Lord is showing him many things. And he's in this vision, John is to go to the temple and he is to measure it. But he was given instructions in verse 2 that said, but exclude the outer court. Don't measure it, because it has been given to the Gentiles. Okay, the temple had the holy place and the Holy of Holies. And then outside that area was the temple for the priest, and the temple, the courtyard for the priest, where sacrifices were made. And then it was enlarged for where any circumcised Jewish male could come in. That area, excuse me. And then beyond that was the grounds, or the courtyard, the women's courtyard. And then beyond that was a courtyard for the Gentiles. So what these instructions are telling John to do is to measure everything except the court of the Gentiles. That brings the footprint of the temple down from what it was in Herod's time, in Jesus' time, that he walked the earth. And why? What did he say? He said, because it has been given to the Gentiles, and they'll trample the holy city for 42 months. 42 months is 3.5 years. That's the last half of the tribulation. And then in verse 3, it uses the term 1,260 days, which, using the calendar, the Babylonian calendar, equates out to 3.5 years as well. The 1,260 days, not every time, but most every time that it's used, is referring to the first half of the tribulation. When they say 42 months, they're referring to the second half of the tribulation. That's not true 100% of the time, but it's pretty doggone true. And he says, I will appoint 2 witnesses. There's a lot of controversy about who these 2 witnesses are. There's lots of folks with ideas about who these two witnesses are. Um, there is a reason why some people have chosen the two that I'm fixing to bring up to you, and I'll share that. The last book of the Old Testament, which is Malachi. And in the 4th chapter, and the 4th and 5th verse, which is the last two verses in the Old Testament, here these two are mentioned. Remember the law of my servant Moses, the decrees and the laws that I gave him at Horeb for all of Israel. See, I will send the prophet Elijah to you before that great and dreadful day of the Lord comes. He will turn the hearts of the parents to their children and the hearts of the children to their parents, or else I will come and strike the land with total destruction. A lot of people think the last mention here of Elijah and Moses are the two that's going to be there. That is my inclination as well. But we just know there's going to be two witnesses. Then you have, when Jesus was walking here with us and he had the transfiguration, who were the two gentlemen that met him on the mountain that were identified? Moses and Elijah. I think these two are Moses and Elijah. And I'll tell you some of my thoughts about why I think they are. They are the two olive trees. While that refers to two different prophets, the two olive trees and the two lampstands, it also says they are the two olive trees and the lampstands. They stand before the Lord in the earth. That is Lord's supernatural protection for these two. And verse 5, it says, I want to go back up. Witnesses. What are they witnesses of? What do you think? What do you think they're witnesses of? What do you think they're witnesses of? Well, look in verse 8. It says, their bodies will lie in the public square of the great city, which is figuratively called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. They are believers in Jesus Christ. They are. That's what they are witnessing about. Do you remember the story about the two disciples on their way to Emmaus? They had heard that Jesus had arisen from the dead, had arose, but they hadn't seen him yet, and they were going home to Emmaus, and all of a sudden, as they walked along and talked about all they had seen in the last week in Jerusalem and in Bethany, all of a sudden a third man joined them and wanted to know what was going on with them, and they told him, and he began to tell them scriptures all through Moses and all the prophets, and shared with them the whole Old Testament, and pulled out things to tell them and show them that that's the way it was supposed to be, that it would be a wonderful thing. And they recognized him when they sat to eat with him and he broke the bread. That's when they recognized that it was Jesus that was talking to them, the risen Lord. Can you imagine what these two witnesses were saying and what they were teaching for this 3.5 years? Do you imagine what they were doing? Every time the priest would be doing something in that temple, they would say, lo, that's why you did that. And this is where it says to do that. In the Old Testament, in the scriptures, in the Torah, and in the Pentateuch. And this is why. Because it was pointing toward Jesus, because this is what it meant. Jesus fulfilled this. And they would, every time that the priests are going to be doing any kind of business in the Lord's house, these two witnesses are going to be proclaiming to anybody around them why it was done originally and how Jesus fulfilled it and proclaiming their God, Jesus Christ, to the multitude. When I was studying this and that come in my heart, I absolutely just wanted to sit down and cry, because how intricate and how detailed our God is, that he would enable to, and they're dressed in sackcloth. They're sad. They're sad that Israel missed their Messiah. They love the Jewish people, and they want the Jewish people to know Christ. And they're adamant and they're strong. Elijah had such a magnetic personality. He was a real exciting man to read his story. And he had power from God. He had such power. God blessed him so much, and he used that power to be a witness for the one true God. And then Moses. Moses was such a leader, and an humble leader, and a godly leader. He wasn't perfect, but then again, I've never met anybody outside of Jesus Christ that was. But those two men, listen how we're going to talk about what they are able to do in this first 3.5 years of the tribulation. They are there when the temple's going up. They are preaching and teaching, evangelizing. Listen to them. Listen to them. You want to stop them? You don't want to listen to them anymore? Well, don't get too close and don't get too excited with them. Because if you try to hinder their message in any way, fire comes from their mouth and you are destroyed. Wouldn't take very long till people would stand way back and hecklers would have been few and far between. Wouldn't take many, would it? Oh, it's so exciting to think about. In verse 5 says, anybody that seeks to harm them will die. This must have absolutely drove the Antichrist wild, because he wants to destroy Israel. He wants to destroy Jerusalem, and he is unable to. He has signed a peace treaty. He has got them all to where they can build this temple back. He is being lauded over by them, but this is not what he wants. He wants to take it, and he can't. These two witnesses are barring his way right now. Right now. He's having to abide by his plan right now. It's amazing. In verse 6, they have the power to shut up the heavens so that it won't rain during the time they're prophesying. That's 3.5 years. Who else shut up the rain for 3.5 years, had the power to do that? That God granted that power to him? Elijah. When the people were drifting away and he was trying to bring the people back to God, he cursed the land for 3.5 years that it wouldn't have any water, any rain. It was amazing. It was amazing. They have so that it wouldn't rain. And then they had the power to turn the water into blood. Who in the Old Testament turned the water into blood? Which plague? It was the first plague that was produced to tell Pharaoh to let the Israelis go, to let the Hebrew children go back in Exodus. Remember? And Moses was there. Turned the water into blood. Can you imagine in a dry and arid land if the water became blood? What a witness it would have been. And it's a plague that these two witnesses can pointedly give. If I'm not telling you the truth, may that water turn to blood. anything of that. I know my imagination is so little, this little, when God has got such a big plan. But it's there, and he can do any of those. He could do any plagues. Suppose I was there and I was very anti-witness, and I'm standing there listening with a frowning face and a non-comprehending, and I'm angry at them, and I just want them shut up, but I'm wary enough not to heckle out loud because I don't want to be a cinder. Ye who do not believe, and now you have bulls. You who do not believe, and all of a sudden your body is covered in lice. Those are the plagues out of Egypt, and they can call any of those down, or they can have totally new ones. Totally new ones if they choose. And they're witnessing as the temple is built, as it is coming online, as they are beginning to practice their religion of old, which has been obliterated with the resurrection of Jesus, the death and then resurrection of Jesus Christ. These witnesses have a lot to say, and a lot of people to listen, and a lot of people to watch. This is the first time in history that now with cell phones, as I'm taping this, I have a grandchild in California, and I'm in Tennessee, and she FaceTimes me and sends me pictures of things she's doing and things she's seeing. These men will be around the world. CNN, ABC, CBS, Fox, they'll all be picking up and Today in Jerusalem, and they will show these men. They'll be witnessing to the world, but they'll be standing in Jerusalem. They will be standing in Jerusalem. Verse 7. Now when they have finished their testimony, they were only told, their job description says for 3.5 years. The first half. That's also when the 144,000 Jewish men are set apart as witnesses for Christ. Now, they have taken the story of Christ, the reality of Christ, the joy of Christ into their hearts, and they have become witnesses. They probably have been taught by these two, and God has put a mark on their forehead to save them from the wrath of God. Not from the wrath of Satan, but the wrath of God. And they go everywhere to preach the word about Jesus Christ. 144,000 milligrams. Or whatever pastor is very strong in your knowledge field. Imagine 144,000 of them. But they've been teaching and preaching. And now their job is just about over. 3.5 years. And their testimony ends. Verse 7, when they have finished their testimony, the beast comes up from the abyss and will attack them and overpower and kill them. Who is that? That's Satan. The beast is Satan. So, comes up. Actually, the beast is the Antichrist. But the Antichrist is Satan embodied, isn't he? So the Antichrist. So, the Antichrist comes up and he attacks them, overpowers them, kills them. Don't know how, but I think the main how is simply because it's God's plan. He said that they would be there for 1,260 days, and that time has now passed. Their job description is over with, so now they're going to leave the scene. And Satan, here's another place. See, Satan through the Antichrist thinks here's another place he's won because he's shut these two up. He kills them. Can you just now see and hear CNN, ABC, CBS, Fox News as they come on? Alert, alert. Witnesses in Jerusalem killed. Remember the audience now. The church has been raptured out. Okay? The church has been raptured out. The only Christians you have are those who have found the Lord after the rapture. The two witnesses have converted. The ones that the 144,000 have converted. And here they are. They're hearing it on the news. Earthly people, not heavenly minded people, hearing that these two witnesses are now killed. At first they're afraid to go up to them, afraid that they don't want to take a chance on getting close. People who tried to harm them before have been burnt alive. Well, here they are lying in the street. They appear to be dead. And such a relief those unbelievers are feeling, because now these people who are trying to convert them and they were telling them how wrong they would be and was trying to convince them other than their natural beliefs are dead and gone, and they're celebrating. For 3.5 days, people from every tribe, language, nation, they're going to gaze on their bodies and they're going to refuse them burial. In Jewish culture, they want to get the body interred within 24 hours. So this is a great insult to leave them where they fell, to not afford them a burial. It's very disrespectful. It's horrid. But at this day and times, things are so skewed that they're rejoicing and they're praising and they're having parties and gifting each other. What culture do we know that gifts each other when someone they consider an enemy dies? Islam. Yeah. It says their bodies will lie in the public square of the great city, which is figuratively called Sodom and Egypt, because of their great sin capacity. Where also their Lord was crucified, where Jesus was crucified. That's how we know it's in Jerusalem for sure. I mean, verse 9 it says, for 3.5 days, some of the people, tribe and nation, they're going to gaze on them through television, through satellites, through cell phones, through all kinds of technological things that up until our generation has not been available. So we can see how this is coming about now. The inhabitants of the earth will gloat over them and will celebrate by sending each other gifts, because these two prophets had tormented those who live on the earth. Tormented them by telling the truth. Tormenting them by showing the error of their way. Tormenting them because they're too arrogant to accept Jesus Christ as their Lord. Too arrogant to admit they have sin in their life. But after 3.5 days, picture the camera and maybe the news person saying, we've been watching for 3.5 days now. Wonder how much longer it will be until authorities allow someone in to take claim of the bodies and to dispose of them. And the cameras are there and they're rolling and people are quiet and they're watching. And verse 11, did you see them move? I think I saw one of them move. But after 3.5 days, the breath of life from God entered them. Do you think it'll be a wind come through? Do you think they'll see that? Do you think they'll hear the rustling? Do you think they'll feel something electric in the air when all of a sudden, even through the television screen, if I'm watching it, Even through the television screen, I see them begin to flinch and to move and maybe to push themselves up into a sitting position. Maybe dust some of the dust off. Then come to their knees and then to stand. Can you imagine what the world will think when they see these two witnesses standing there? These three that had been killed and laying there to rot for 3.5 days. It would be a terror sure enough then, wouldn't it? What would be your first thoughts? Fear? Yeah, and if you were there close to them, you would be afraid that they would retaliate and what was going to happen. That would be common, would be natural, and terror struck them. Terror, this word that's transcribed into terror from Greek into English for terror, means absolute terror, means a horrid terror, a terror that is very, very gripping. This is not something that they will pass up. Talk about PTSD. This is something they will not pass from their memory anytime. But verse 12 says, Then they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, everyone's attention now is right on those two men standing there in front of the temple. The people standing there, the people watching television screens, the people watching phone screens, satellite screens, they'll see them stand and it'll almost take your breath away. But wait till the next thing that happens. Then they hear a loud voice from heaven. It will come booming out of the sky. It will be very clear, articulate, and it will be very directed to the two witnesses. Come up here. John heard that, didn't he? Back in chapter 4. Come up here. But notice they are not raptured up. They are not taken quickly up. Listen to what happens. And they went up to heaven in a cloud while the enemies looked on. Oh my goodness. Do you remember when Christ, at his ascension, how the disciples stood and watched him as he rose on a cloud going up into heaven? It wasn't like the rapture where we went quicker than a blink of an eye. These men, can you see the cameras panning on them as they go up to heaven? If that sounds to come up here and watch them go. What is the topic of conversation from that point for the rest of the day? Did you see that? Did you see that? While their enemies looked on, Christ went up while his friends, his disciples, his loved people he loved and that loved him watched. These men went up and enemies were watching. At that very hour, not at that very moment, but within that hour, there was a severe earthquake and 1/10 of the city collapsed. 1/10 of what city? Where are they at? They're in Jerusalem. 1/10 of Jerusalem is going to fall in an earthquake. 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake. And the survivors were terrified. And they gave glory to the God in heaven. The Jews are glorifying God. The same problems that they had the day before have totally changed. They see God's hand at work now. And it is causing them to have such a crisis in their spirit, and know that the second woe is past and the third woe is coming.